Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the webinar today on equipping staff with the tools to help higher risk and need youth. I appreciate your time and your energy that you're bringing to our session today. I also want to thank you, Council of State Governments, for hosting us today on your virtual platform. And I also want to thank the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. The funding for this webinar is through them as part of a larger grant for the Juvenile Justice System Reform on training and technical assistance. For those of you that I don't have the pleasure of knowing, which is probably many on this call, thanks to the large number of folks who decided to join us, my name is Mindy Smith. I'm the Executive Director of the University of Cincinnati Corrections Institute. The Corrections Institute translates research into practice by conducting research on correctional interventions, developing evidence-informed and evidence-based tools, and providing training and technical assistance to professionals working with justice-involved populations. UCCI is housed within the School of Criminal Justice in the College of Education, Criminal Justice, Human Services, and Information Technology at the University of Cincinnati. At its core, UCCI uniquely combines theory and practice through two avenues of innovation. The research pathway serves to study and support data-driven strategies that advance evidence-based practices in corrections. The implementation pathway, on the other hand, serves to apply correctional research in ways that strengthen program effectiveness, encouraging professionals to become agents of change. This partnership helps to substantially narrow the gap between academic research and correctional practice in ways that positively impacts lives and shapes safer communities. And so today, as part of my work at UCCI, I have the honor of moderating this session and introducing to you Chad Jensen, the Director of Juvenile Court Services for the Iowa Judicial Branch, and James Jackson, Program Administrator 2 for the Ohio Department of Youth Services. I've had the pleasure of working with Chad and James through the years as they have adopted effective practices in community support, also known as EPICS, with their teams. EPICS is a model that's designed to help community supervision officers target higher risk youth, their criminogenic needs, using cognitive behavioral approaches. Both the individuals on our webinar today and their respective agencies have worked tirelessly to help staff use the model to serve higher risk and need youth in their community. Recognizing the value of keeping kids close to home, serving them in their community, building on youth strengths, and working closely with their areas of risk, the EPICS model provides a structure for staff and youth interactions and aims to reduce a youth's overall risk for recidivism. More specifically, the model aims to teach probation and parole officers how to apply the principles of effective intervention and core correctional practices specifically to community supervision settings. Officers are taught to increase dosage to higher risk individuals, stay focused on criminogenic needs, and especially draw that connection between our thinking and our behavior, and to use a social learning theory cognitive behavioral approach to their interactions with youth. The officers are trained in the three main principles of effective intervention: risk, need, responsivity, as well as the 8 core correctional practices. Many of us are familiar with risk, need, responsivity, with the idea being that we're prioritizing those higher risk youth. We're prioritizing those areas that put them at greatest risk for reoffending, and we do so in ways that are generally responsive to creating strong learning environments. So we're meeting youth where they're at. We're meeting their specific learning styles, creating a strong environment for learning, and then we're using effective learning strategies such as cognitive behavioral interventions. Core correctional practices, on the other hand, are those practices that can increase the therapeutic potential of the efforts of community supervision, and if implemented properly, can reduce recidivism by teaching youth how to engage in long-term pro-social behavior. Core correctional practices include developing strong relationships, having effective use of reinforcement, disapproval, and use of authority in your toolkit, serving as a pro-social model, and regularly relying on cognitive restructuring, social skills training, and problem-solving skills when working with youth. In the EPICS model, staff are also taught a very simple way to structure their contact session to encourage officers to check in and build rapport with the youth, monitor compliance, review goals in the case plan regularly, while also discussing any treatment referrals and directly targeting high-risk situations for future criminal conduct. And so in this way, our presenters today are very excited to share with you their journey to implement EPICS with higher risk and need youth. Each brings a different perspective to the call. And we will have Chad kind of talking about it from a state level of probation working to serve these youth, and James, who works with the Ohio Department of Youth Services in the parole division. And so I hope that you find their journey helpful as you all continue on your journey to implement effective practices and best serve youth. And with that, I'd like to highlight our objectives and then give some time for our presenters to introduce themselves. So during our time together today, we are going to try to uplift the importance of using research, including the principles of effective intervention, to inform our practice. We're going to identify the successes and challenges of transforming supervision practices, because let me be very clear, these individuals have undergone significant transformation and are still transforming today. So I hope you'll hear their transformation through the years. And then lastly, identify those lessons learned so that it may help you as you're planning and considering not just your day-to-day practice, but also potential support from OJJDP as you continue to transform your work. And so without further ado, I would love to pass the mic over to James to give him a chance to introduce himself. James?
So good afternoon. I'm James Jackson, bringing you greetings from snowy Cleveland, Ohio. I just thank Mindy for the opportunity to just share some of the things that we've worked on in Ohio over the years. And I've been with the department for 28 years, and I've been working in the field of criminal justice for 29 years. And there's a lot of lessons learned, a lot of challenges, but also some successes along the way. So I look forward to sharing them with you as we go through our presentation today.
Thank you, James. And Chad?
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Chad Jensen, and I'm the Director of Juvenile Court Services for the Iowa Judicial Branch. Previously, I was the Chief Juvenile Court Officer in the 5th Judicial District, which consists of Polk County and 15 other counties in central and south central Iowa. My position was created approximately 3.5 years ago within state court administration to really help unify and align juvenile court services, to be one voice to represent the agency at the state level, to really kind of help standardize our practices and procedures, to improve equity and outcomes for youth and families, to advance evidence-based practices, and coordinate large initiatives such as EPICS, and then provide strategic leadership and strategic planning for the organization. And again, thank you for the opportunity to share our journey over the past 8 years to implement EPICS on a statewide basis. Thank you.
Thank you both. Just a friendly reminder to everyone with the Zoom webinar setup, everyone's cameras are off but the presenters, so you will continue to see the three of us through the presentation, but not each other who are on the call. Additionally, we will save time for question and answer at the end. And so there is a feature within Zoom webinar that allows you to make note of your questions as we go throughout this. So please do not hesitate to log your question. We will revisit that at the end of the webinar and select as many as we have time for to answer. And we'll do our best to send some follow-up responses if we run out of time. So I'm going to go ahead and pass the mic over to Chad so he can begin talking a little bit about Iowa's experience.
Great. Thank you, Mindy. So our journey to implement EPICS is a work in progress. So in other words, the journey is in progress as we speak. We started our EPICS journey back in 2015. And although we've made significant progress, we've not quite yet reached our destination. However, EPICS is currently our primary probation model in all 8 of our judicial districts. EPICS has really been instrumental, I think, in transforming the role of juvenile court officers from compliance monitoring to agents of change. Our juvenile court officers or probation officers now see themselves as practitioners who promote positive behavior change during their one-on-one interactions with youth that they supervise. We are striving to fully implement the model to fidelity across the state. So I really want to share some of our lessons learned so that jurisdictions can learn both from our mistakes as well as some of the successes. We are still working on the need to adopt more robust CQI measures. working on ways to measure and our desired outcomes as well as our successes. We're currently exploring a research project with UCCI to evaluate Iowa's ethics. Our ultimate goal is we really want to know how the model is impacting Iowa's youth. And then we're also continuing to build our internal capacity in order to sustain our ethics efforts, So for instance, we continue to work on building out the number of coders and train the trainers within our organization. So one of our initial shortfalls when we initially onboarded the ethics model is that juvenile court services really lacked a centralized structure that allowed for a statewide standardization of our policies and procedures. Iowa Juvenile Court Services, just for background information, is made up of 8 judicial districts, and each judicial district has a chief juvenile court officer. So juvenile court officers within each district supervise youth across the entire continuum of delinquency cases, all the way from intake to reentry. So we do not pass off a case when the youth is court ordered into out-of-home residential treatment. The juvenile court officer continues to provide supervision services for that youth while they're in residential care all the way through return back into the community. When we first embarked on our ethics journey, we came to realize that our casework practices really did differ greatly between the districts. Ethics was really the impetus that helped to unify our organization and standardize our casework practices across the state. Given our lack of a centralized governance structure, our initial rollout really was inconsistent across the state and lacked structure and uniformity. Most districts had no implementation policies and allowed their juvenile court officers to use the model at their discretion, which to no surprise resulted in real minimal usage of the model. We also had no systemic way to measure ethics practices and procedures across the state. However, despite the lack of uniformity and standardization, we did have some best practices building blocks in place. For instance, all 8 districts were utilizing the Iowa Delinquency Assessment, which we refer to as the IDA, which is our risk and need instrument. And we also had our staff trained in motivational interviewing. We quickly realized that we needed to have a statewide policy that really focused on frequency of the model as well as dosage. So we developed a statewide policy, which was made up of a committee of line staff as well as leadership. It was really important for us to include a broad range of perspectives when developing the policy. And the policy really focused to ensure that we were implementing the model to fidelity with a proper frequency and dosage to achieve the desired positive behavior change of the youth that we supervise. So the policy defines and establishes consistent and statewide guidelines for the use of ethics, created a standardized statewide process for managing ethics practices and procedures while also maintaining fidelity of the ethics model. Our policy also provides direction to juvenile court services personnel in addressing risk reduction, accountability, as well as community safety. The frequency or dosage outlined in our policy is directly tied to the Iowa Delinquency Assessment risk level. So we increase our dosage for our higher risk youth. Our policy has established minimum contact standards. And again, these are minimum contact standards. Depending on the size and the makeup of our caseloads, many of our juvenile court officers are actually able to exceed these contact standards. But at a minimum, we want our officers to administer 2 EPIC sessions a month for our moderate risk youth, 3 EPIC sessions a month for our high risk youth. And as I had previously mentioned, we continue to supervise youth even while they're out of the home. So for continuity purposes, we're asking our officers to administer an EPIC session to youth during their face-to-face visits in residential settings. We do allow our officers to reduce their contacts when the dynamic criminogenic needs, as indicated in the youth's CAPE plan, show a reduction. To ensure fidelity to the model, we require that each EPIC session includes all 4 components, which is the check-in, review, intervention, and homework. Now, I think training is just absolutely critical to implementing the ethics model or any other structured probation model to fidelity. So we have invested a lot of time and resources in train the trainers in each of our 8 judicial districts. So our train the trainers have really become those change champions and subject matter experts in their respective districts. Train the trainers are responsible for conducting end user training for all of our new staff, and they conduct booster or refresher sessions in their districts. Our train the trainers also meet as a group to help identify areas of improvement and what's working well with the model. Our new staff are trained by EPICS by our internal train the trainers during their initial training academy or onboarding experience. We're currently working on developing a comprehensive training plan or blueprint to hold 2 academies per year to ensure our new staff are trained on the EPICS model in a consistent and timely manner. We also encourage our staff to be trained as coders. We have found that this helps to not only build capacity to code audio tapes, but it also helps staff learn the model at a deeper level. When I was the chief in D5, all of our supervisors became coders and certified coders, not only so they could code audio tapes for the staff that they supervise, it also again helped them to develop a greater level of understanding and familiarity with the model. Another key component to training, I think, is having a certification process. So we developed a certification process to ensure that staff are proficient in using the model. Upon completion and for a period of no less than 1 year, our juvenile court officers submit monthly audios for coding, and or they participate in live coding sessions on our moderate and high risk cases and attend monthly coaching sessions. Our juvenile court officers must attempt all 4 components of the model, achieve an overall coding score of 80%, and attain satisfactory on different interventions for 2 consecutive sessions prior to transitioning to quarterly audio submissions. Challenges. Documentation, data collection, measuring success has all been very challenging for our organization. We develop event codes within our case management system to really capture the EPIC sessions that were attempted. So we use our JEPC event code, which stands for Juvenile Epics Completed, or JEPA, which stands for Juvenile Epics Attempted in our case management system. We also created an EPICS case management screen that documents the components of the model. Early on in our implementation, I think staffs really struggled to understand how EPICS built upon our Iowa delinquency assessment, motivational interviewing, as well as case planning. So instead of seeing the components of one cohesive process, staff saw EPICS as a standalone process and integrated as such. I think we've alleviated this concern by making sure that we include EPICS in our onboarding session in our JCO Academy. So we start by teaching juvenile court officers motivational interviewing. And then we teach them on our Iowa delinquency assessment. And then we teach them on effective case planning. And then we follow up with our EPICS training. We also lacked infrastructure, and readiness was another challenge. So we lacked those change champions and did not sufficiently prepare staff and establish the why. We also lacked coders and trained the trainers when the model was initially rolled out. Staff resistance, I think, is something also that we experienced as a challenge. Resistance, I think, unfortunately, to the EPICS model was increased because at the time when we rolled out the model, we lacked a statewide client contact expectations. So when the EPICS model outlined how often the model would be used for our higher risk kids, staff actually attributed the increased contact, was sometimes equated to more work, to the EPICS model. Lessons learned. There's been many during our journey. One of the big lessons is policy implementation and communication plans have to be in place when first implementing the model. Also, establish EPICS eligible youth and how frequently the model will be used when you initially roll out the model. Another lesson learned is develop capacity at the beginning to ensure all staff are trained on the model in a timely and consistent manner. I would suggest the training plan should also incorporate both regular and meaningful booster or refresher sessions on a regular basis. Structured probation models are difficult to implement and sustain. Expect staff pushback. Expect to hear comments from line staff such as, "I don't have the time," or "I'm already doing it," or "the model is too scripted," or "what I'm doing is working, so why even change?" And then continually to motivate staff to really buy into the model and help them to become change agents for even new staff that come on board. Sustainability is another key component to onboarding the EPICS model. Coding coaches, boosters, train the trainers, I think are all key components to sustaining the EPICS model. Coaches and coders code those audio submissions and return coding forms to staff within 2 weeks after receiving audios. Coaches then review the coding forms and meet with our juvenile court officers to provide follow-up within 1 week of returned coded audios. We also rely on the feedback loop. Supervisors and juvenile court officers review their case list, the number of EPIC sessions, and any modifications to the youth case plan utilizing data, which includes the number of EPIC sessions required for each JCO, contact sessions per client, and then the short form IDA risk level. JCO onboarding. Our new JCOs are trained on the model during their academy and their onboarding experience. Another key component to sustainability, I think, is generating staff buy-in. We stress to our staff that EPICS maximizes the use of face-to-face contacts to reduce risk and promote positive behavior change. I remember when we were receiving resistance from our staff when we first rolled out the model, I challenged our staff because if we have to see our youth in the community on a consistent, regular basis, I challenged them to find another model, another structured probation model that incorporated all the core correctional practices, was based on evidence-based practices that had evidence to demonstrate that it was more effective. And over the last 8 years, not one officer has come forward with an alternative model. And then we also continually work on establishing incentives and goal setting with each of our juvenile court officers. So Juvenile Court Services worked with our IT department to develop a method for collecting data related to EPICS within the case management system. This system now is able to gather EPICS data related to each part of the EPICS process, including the tools used and skills taught. So collection of this data will help us measure the effectiveness of EPICS for youth and engage in continuous quality improvement. I'm now going to highlight just a few real case scenarios that I do think helps to illustrate how effective the model can be in working with high-risk youth within the community. So in the first scenario, this involves a 17-year-old male youth who scored high risk in current relationships. This was a youth who was in a toxic relationship with his girlfriend that often resulted in verbal and sometimes even physical altercations. So the JCO focused on skill building interventions during EPIC sessions, including having difficult conversations. Initially, the youth thought the sessions wouldn't help and thought that the role playing was quote unquote silly. Eventually, the youth realized that the skill building interventions really helped and the role playing made a difference in having difficult conversations and made it much easier. The feedback from the youth also reassured the juvenile court officer that the EPICS model works. Second scenario involves a high-risk 13-year-old male with a long history of oppositional defiant behaviors within the home. The youth came to our attention due to aggression towards his mother. The youth had a history of out-of-home placements, including placements in psychiatric medical institutes for children. The juvenile court officer used EPIC sessions to focus on effective reinforcement with the mother and the youth, while also holding the youth accountable by using effective use of authority and effective use of disapproval. As a result, the mother does a much better job of balancing positive behaviors while holding her son accountable for negative behaviors. Improvement has also been observed in the way the mother speaks and communicates with his son. The third case scenario involves a high-risk 17-year-old male with a history of aggressive behavior. The juvenile court officer used behavior chain as an intervention to help the youth identify his thoughts before acting out physically. By the end of the case, the youth began replacing risky thoughts before reacting physically towards others, which significantly reduced the number of aggressive episodes. And finally, scenario number 4 involves a moderate risk 15-year-old male who was referred for a problematic sexualized offense. The youth denied the offense at the beginning of the case, and by case closure, took full responsibility for his behaviors. The juvenile court officer worked with this youth for almost 3 years and used behavior chains and cognitive restructuring to replace his risky thinking with more pro-social thinking. This youth eventually graduated early from high school, obtained full-time employment, and had no further problematic sexualized behaviors. I hope that this presentation is useful for those jurisdictions who are considering onboarding or implementing the ethics model, and provide some of the successes and lessons learned that we have. I'm looking forward to any questions that you may have at the towards the end of the presentation. And by all means, I've included my contact information even after the webinar. If you would like to reach out and have a conversation with ethics, I'd be more than happy to engage with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chad. It is now my pleasure to turn it over to James to share Ohio's journey.
Thank you, Mindy, and thanks, Chad, for a great presentation. So Ohio's ethics journey, as Chad was saying earlier, that it's a journey that we are continuing on, and we have not arrived at our destination as well. It's been more so like a roller coaster ride, but it's been a good ride. So let's start off with how we began here in Ohio. Everything kind of kicks off with our Ohio Youth Assessment system, which is called the OYAS. So the OYAS guides our programming decisions and intervention planning process with our youth. We use the OYAS basically to determine how we're going to work with our young person in the facility, how we're going to engage them when they come out into the community. And the OYAS consists of 7 domains. The domains are listed as the juvenile justice history, which is static, meaning it doesn't change. It is what it is. The history is going to be what it is. Then the other 6 are the family and living arrangements, peer and social support networks, education, employment, pro-social skills, substance abuse, mental health, and personality. And the last one is values and beliefs. So within our meeting with our young person, we use this OYAS, which we call our system that we use to direct our interventions. We look at the OYAS and determine the risk, need, responsivity issues with our young people. And then we target those areas on the OYAS that are high or moderate, or our juvenile parole officers have the discretion to target other areas if they see fit or see some things that are cropping up. So we use that OYAS to build our case plans, and we target those with our young people. For example, here's an example that I will give you. Officer is working with a young person, and for instance, they are showing that they're high in education and employment, but are lacking motivation with regards to getting an education. Don't really see what the purpose is of getting an education. What our officers would do is target the correct intervention to use with that young person. And in this case, we would generally use probably a cost-benefit analysis. And we'll have that officer work with them after they've done their check-in and their review portion. In the intervention portion, they would use a cost-benefit analysis where they would work with a young person one-on-one to talk about their lack of interest and to outline the long-term and short-term costs associated with them not getting an education. And then we would ask the young person to come up with an alternative behavior. And what we try not to do is do the opposite behavior of what that particular young person is presenting. So if the young person is not going to school and doesn't want to be motivated, we try not to do as the alternative behavior, go to school. So what we try to do is get them to think outside the box, maybe tie into their goals, what it is that they said that they want to do, what they want to achieve. And we try to use that as the alternative behavior, have them to outline their costs, long-term costs and benefits associated with the alternative behavior. Then we have a conversation. We place those 2 cost-benefit analysis side by side and have a conversation about how they look, what the outcomes are regarding those 2 cost-benefit analysis. And hopefully we will get our young person to buy in to say, yeah, the second or the alternative behavior does look like the direction that I want to go into. And as a parole officer, we try to get them to buy into it and also come alongside them and say, well, how can I help you achieve your goal? How can I help you get here? And hopefully we will work on that and hold the youth accountable to what it is that they said that they wanted to do. So officers use interventions to target the high domains, as I said, the interventions such as substance abuse, mental health, and family and living arrangements. We refer those out to professionals, but we also continue to check in on the progress of that when they are going to substance abuse education groups, family counseling, or mental health counseling. We use that portion of the model, which is the review, to check in to see how that progress is going, and also hold them accountable to their parole case plan, to let them know that we're checking in on what it is they're doing, we're communicating with their therapists and things of that nature. So some implementation successes that I kind of want to take a look at. One of the things that I'm really proud of here in Ohio is that we do have 2 individuals who are now certified in as lead trainers who can actually do the 3-day end user training, and we have 2 individuals who are certified as co-facilitators to come alongside us. That has been a long process for us. Chad, I think he said that they started in 2015. Well, I want to see your 2015 and start with 2009. So that's where we started our journey in 2009, and we finally got to a place where in 2022, we've gotten individuals who are certified to train our staff. And why that's a big deal, it's because we have the opportunity now to train our staff when they come in the door. And I'll talk about the challenge later, but that's a really huge thing that you really want to do is have your staff trained when they are initially onboarded in your agency. One of the things that we're also proud of is that we've established a process where we are doing continuous boosters or training with our staff. And we've had buy-in from our supervisors, our midline supervisors, mid-level supervisors who facilitate those booster sessions. And that's a really big deal because what it does, it shows that our supervisors are bought in and they have the day-to-day interactions with their staff and let them know that, hey, this is how we operate. This is what we do. This is how we do business. This is our model of supervision. And so we've seen some improvement with regards to buy-in from staff. So that's really been something that I'm happy about. The officers are using the model not only in the community, but in the facility. So one of the things that our agency has put an emphasis on is seeing our young people in the facility. Back when I started as a parole officer, and that was some time ago, a long time ago, I think we were required to see our youth maybe once a month and while they were in the facility. But our agency has really put an emphasis on building those relationships, developing the rapport while our youth are in the facility, introducing them to the concepts of ethics, risk, need, responsivity, core behavior practices while they're there. So when they come out into the community, these concepts aren't foreign to them. They've been practicing them. And a lot of times we have our officers get a lot of practice because, as you know, when they're in the facility, they have a lot of time to get up to mischief, and we can address those issues with them while they're in there. So that's one of the things, another implementation success that I'm really happy about, proud of. And then we also have the normalization of ethics. I think I spoke about it earlier, is that It's become the way we do business. It's how we interact with our kids. Um, it's how we build our case plans. We kind of use that in our supervision with the officers. You know, when the officers have case supervision with their supervisors and they're discussing their kids, and they have a kid that might be a little tough or had some difficulty in the community, it's an opportunity to discuss what type of interventions are we using to maybe to help that young person along, to get them unstuck and moving on the right track and into a productive manner. And then I want to talk about some of the challenges that we've faced along the way with regards to our implementation of ethics. There has to be buy-in. That's a big one. And not only buy-in from staff, but there has to be buy-in from high-level agency officials. So with us, we're talking about the director, the assistant director, the bureau chief, the assistant bureau chief, as well as the supervisor. All of us have to be on the same page. You know, I think initially when Epics was rolled out, it sounded great. It looked great. We heard great things about it. But as you know, we work for state agencies, so there's been turnover at the top. So you now have to introduce the model to those individuals again and again and again as you get a new director or a new bureau chief. So you have to sell that product to them once again as to why it's effective and why it would be beneficial to use for our officers as well as our young people. Another challenge is, as I said that I would talk about, is teaching the model on the onboarding process when we have our officers get hired. Historically, before myself got trained and a counterpart of mine got trained, we would have to wait for the University of Cincinnati to train our officers. We would have to develop a contract with them, have the contract approved, and go through this whole process. So let's lay out a scenario where an officer gets hired in August, and we're waiting for the University of Cincinnati to say, okay, that contract looks good. They send it back to us. We say that contract looks good. Now we're talking about February. So we have an officer that was hired in August. Contract gets approved in February. And I think we're ready to train that particular person in June. So now this person has almost been working over 9 months to 10 months in our agency. But we're saying that this is our supervision model. This is how we do business. So now we have to bring that person in June, who was hired last August, and say, forget everything that you were doing. This is how we really want you to do it. So getting that piece of the ethics process and the people trained and certified has really been a benefit, because I'm seeing our new officers. We've had 2 cohorts that have gone through the 3-day end user training, and we're now waiting to hire several more officers so that we can have another training and bring them on. But what I'm seeing is that as we catch them coming into the agency fresh and new, that they're buying in and they don't know anything other than this is how we do business. And we're seeing them use the model on a consistent basis, as opposed to some of our seasoned staff, as Chad had indicated, hey, I've been doing it for 15 years this way, appears to be working for me. Why should I have to change? Now we have those staff coming in the door, understanding that this is the model of supervision we use, understanding that this is how our documentation should look when we work with our young person. And we've seen a higher level of usage with our new staff as opposed to our seasoned staff, which is a good thing. The ongoing booster trainings, that's one of the things that we need to work on as well. And as you heard, we have 2 individuals who have been trained as co-leaders. So internal capacity is huge for us. like I said, I'm on year 29. So, and the other individual, I think, may be on year 7. So what that does is put a strain on the agency and it sets us back. So what we're looking at is trying to build that internal capacity, so that we can have individuals, say for instance, if I leave, I don't leave with all the knowledge out the door, and the program and the model is able to be sustainable after I'm gone. So we're looking at building that internal capacity, which is going to be crucial for us. So the next level of us is hope of our agency is hoping that we can get our supervisors certified and trained in the model, which would be awesome. To tell the truth, it will alleviate some work for me, but it will really be awesome. So that's one of the things that we're looking at. And then another challenge for us is consistency. Using the model as prescribed, with regards to dosage. We have some conflicts within the agency when it comes to our officers saying, well, James, I did my epics for the month. And my question is, what do you mean you did your epics for the month? It's when, our standard of contact is for our high youth, we meet them once a week, so 4 times a month. So if you have an individual who is high, then you should have 4 contacts with regards to you using the model with that particular youth. And if they're moderate, we meet with them every other week. So 2 contacts. So my question to some of our officers is like, when you're not doing epics, what are you doing? So, we want to continue to emphasize the fact that every time we meet with a young person, we use the model, and the model builds off of one session to the next. So that's one of our challenges that we have to get across to our officers, is the consistency piece. And then what I'm really going to probably reach out and touch bases with Chad is talking about that policy piece and CQI. So we're looking at developing CQI to say, how effective has this been with our youth in Ohio? Are we seeing any reduction in recidivism? I had did a project about 4 years ago for our agency, and I reached out to a counterpart or a colleague in Oregon, and he was able to share his experiences with me with regards to how Oregon practices epics, and was able to give data, real live data, about how they saw a reduction in recidivism with their young people when the model was used consistently. So that's one of the pieces I think that we're going to be taking off and going in that direction in the upcoming years, is building that internal capacity, developing CQI practices and policy to make sure that there's sustainability with regards to the model. And then lastly, for me, is the impact on the officers. What I can say is that our officers are better prepared when they go into a contact session, more organized. So what I do is, part of my job is I go out with officers on ride-alongs, and I witness firsthand how they're facilitating their sessions. And you can tell an individual who uses the model consistently and one who doesn't. You can hear it on audios. You can hear it immediately when you turn on the tape, whether or not this particular officer uses epics on a consistent basis, or this is something that I got to turn in to James and let's get this done. But like I said, I go with officers on ride-alongs and, observe firsthand of how they're using the model. And what it does is brings a preparedness to that particular session. It also has given our officers a level of competency and skill with using cognitive behavioral interventions and core correctional practices, behavior practices, when they're with their youth. Um, they're more able to address an issue as opposed to maybe telling a life story or a similar situation that I went through when I was 15. You know, I can relate, man. So we're able to use some cognitive behavioral therapy, some evidence-based practices when we're coming to our sessions. And then it allows our officers to have better documentation when they're doing case notes. One of the things that we do is when we meet with our officers, they do have a tab with regards to saying that they completed an ethics session and what that looks like. And one of the things I try to stress to our officers who are having a little trouble with understanding how these sessions build upon one another is that we take for instance, you meet with a kid today and you can document in your case note that you work with them on a cost benefit analysis. If they're on high supervision, you meet with them next week, which will be the 9th of November. You document that you continue to do a cost benefit analysis, or that there are another issue that arises when you did the check-in that you want to do a cognitive restructure and behavior chain on. So we have to do what is called a discharge report. And what I've shown our officers is if we're documenting appropriately and if we're documenting consistently what it is that we're doing in our sessions, then those discharge reports actually write themselves. You can go chronologically through a young person's stay with us on community supervision and tell a story about what it is that they've done their entire time on parole. So that's been a benefit to our officers. And one of the last benefits that I think that is really, really beneficial for our officers, it gives us our officers a stepwise approach to their meetings. Once again, that goes back to organization and being better prepared. It lets the officers know that, hey, I need to do this check-in. And in this check-in, I'm monitoring for compliance, building my rapport, and all of those things. And then I'm going to my review where I want to develop my goals. I want to talk about community referrals. I want to also talk about the previous assignments that we had to make sure that they're doing them. And then we step into our interventions of what the work we want to do that particular day. And then we assign homework to reinforce what it is that we did in that meeting. So that gives our officers an idea of what it is that they should be doing in their meetings. And I'll just share this really quick as I close, that when I was an officer, I think in 2001, I had no idea what it is that I was doing. So I would basically come up with my own thing. I would say, hey man, how's school going? Good. Got your community service? Good. Looking for a job? Good. Coming home for curfew? Good. See you next week. You know, so what Ethics has done is brought that organization once again to us and that stepwise approach as to what it is a session should look like with one of our young people on parole. And with that, Mindy, I will turn it over back to you. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. My contact information isn't up, but I can have that provided to Mindy, to those who may reach out to her. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Thank you, Chad. I appreciate both of you taking the time to walk us through that. I love how you both quickly acknowledged at the onset that this is a journey and one that is not yet done. I think sometimes we often forget when we try something new and when we make a commitment to implement something that doesn't happen overnight, and it comes with pains and it comes with lessons learned, but it also comes with successes. And so I appreciate you taking the time to highlight those and call attention to those. I do think lots of questions have been raised. I tried to synthesize them a little bit, just recognizing the time. We have about 6 minutes for questions. And I want to ask the attendees, those of you that have very specific questions for Chad or James about staffing size or specific tactics, please reach out to them directly. James and Chad, I'm going to ask you just to drop your contact information in the Q&A, so folks will have it there. And then If all else fails, feel free to reach out to me as well. And I can connect you to Chad or James with more specifics. But early on, there was a couple of questions regarding how you measure fidelity. People were very concerned about the importance of fidelity, knowing its close connection to outcomes. And so how are you measuring fidelity within your agencies? If you could each just take a minute and respond to that pretty high level, that would be wonderful. And we'll just go in the order we presented. So Chad, if you don't mind, just starting first, then we'll hit James.
You bet. Thank you. As I had mentioned in the presentation, I think the audio recordings is one of the ways that we're able to measure the fidelity to the model. Like I said, we have coders who will review those audio tapes and code them to make sure that they're hitting all 4 components of the model and that they are actually following the model to fidelity, and they get rated on how well they're adhering to the model. And like I said, we have a proficiency standard that we require before our JCOs move from monthly audio submissions down to quarterly. And we can adjust that depending on how they're progressing, or if they take backward steps. Maintaining proficiency is another challenge sometimes, even once you get past the initial end user training. If you don't have regular, consistent booster sessions or refresher sessions, I think you find that sometimes staff will take some steps backwards. So those audios to us, or even just sitting in and observing the sessions, have been 2 effective tools just to make sure that our staff are adhering to the model. And the way we set up our case management system, which kind of really resembles the 4 components of the model, is also a way for us to go in and see how they're documenting the sessions, again, to kind of measure that with fidelity issues.
Thank you, Chad. James?
Yeah, so for us, we're kind of set up a little different. And right now, here's the challenge for us is I'm the only individual in my agency who's responsible for audios, coding, and coaching. So that's why it's going to be really important for us to have that sustainability. But what it is that we do require our officers to submit audios, and those audios are reviewed. And once those audios are reviewed, I set up a coaching session with that individual, and we go over the audio, the strengths, and the weaknesses and the areas of improvement. And we take notes and we keep notes. And I think we're somewhere around 30 officers, if I'm not mistaken, somewhere in that number. So I'm responsible for 30 officers. So you can imagine the challenge of trying to make sure that all 30 officers are proficient. But that's one of the ways that we do it. And then we use our booster sessions with regards to trying to make sure that our officers are utilizing the model correctly. And then we try to bring it down to another level of unit meetings. So our officers and their staff and their supervisors have unit meetings monthly. So what we try to do is pull out a piece of the model and go over it in our unit meetings. So for instance, Monday, we have a unit meeting in Unit 1, which is our Toledo area. And they invite me in, and we go over some of the principles of the model just as a refresher, and we address some of the things that may not be going well, and we try to encourage them to continue to do the things that they are doing well. But that's really a good question, because that's why we're looking at developing that CQI piece. That's going to be really important to see how we're doing, if we're having an impact on recidivism. One of the things that I would have really liked to have done is monitor the caseloads of our new officers coming in, as opposed to some of our seasoned officers, and take a look at what those recidivism rates look like, incidents and occurrences with law enforcement, how many contacts they've had with law enforcement, how their school attendance and progress looks like. So CQI is going to be a real big portion of what it is we do as we move forward.
Thank you, James. Thank you both for really concrete examples there of how you're working with your team to build fidelity. I think that's really important. Unfortunately, we are at 3 o'clock, so we've hit our mark for ending. Please do not hesitate to reach out to us directly with any questions or concerns. I will also remind you that the session has been recorded and will be available after today, as well as the slide deck. So thank you all for attending. Thank you again, Chad and James, for your time and for being willing to share your journey with so many of us on the call today. Truly an inspiration when we think about using science to drive practice. And I love that not only is the model that you adopted driven by science, but your implementation of it is. You're constantly collecting your own data and looking at where you need to improve, reaching for that, ever so high post of high fidelity implementation. So thank you again, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.